Saudi Arabia is the world's largest producer of desalinated water, where researchers have patented several technologies to extract minerals from water while protecting marine ecosystems from wastewater.
In the heart of Arabia, where temperatures soar past 50 degrees Celsius and the horizon ripples with heat, water is more valuable than gold. Yet beneath those endless dunes runs one of the most ambitious engineering networks on Earth, a colossal web of pipelines carrying life itself. Stretching farther than rivers, slicing through mountains, Saudi Arabia built what many now call a man-made Nile, turning desert dreams into liquid reality. Believe it or not, it's actually happening. The vision, turning the desert green. For most of human history, the Arabian Peninsula was defined by its absence of water. It's a place where rivers never ran, and rainfall was more myth than memory. For centuries, life here depended on oases and ancient wells, small dots of green surrounded by infinite beige. But as Saudi Arabia rose into a modern nation powered by oil, another question began to loom larger than any skyscraper in Riyadh. What happens when the water runs out? By the late 20th century, Saudi Arabia's water consumption had exploded. Cities were growing faster than the desert could absorb, and agriculture, fueled by deep fossil aquifers, was draining reserves that had taken thousands of years to form. Some scientists warned that if the trend continued, the country could run dry within decades. And so, a radical idea emerged. What if Saudi Arabia could build its own river? That dream became the foundation for one of the most ambitious infrastructure programs on the planet, a massive network of desalination plants and pipelines designed to pump seawater from the Red Sea and Arabian Gulf, strip away the salt, and send fresh water surging across the desert. It wasn't just a project. It was a reinvention of geography. This wasn't about vanity. It was survival, wrapped in national vision. Under the Kingdom's Vision 2030 plan, Saudi Arabia committed to reshaping its economy and its environment. The goal wasn't just to have water, but to master it, to sustain cities, grow crops in sand, and turn empty plains into livable land. The Saline Water Conversion Corporation, SWCC, became the beating heart of this mission, operating more than 24 desalination facilities and controlling over 14,000 kilometers of water transmission lines, enough to stretch beyond the Nile and back again if laid in one continuous thread. These pipelines don't simply connect cities, they connect coastlines to life itself. Water flows inland from massive coastal plants near Jubail, Yanbu, and Shuqaiq, sometimes traveling hundreds of kilometers through scorching deserts and steep terrain before reaching thirsty regions like Riyadh, Mecca, and Medina. It's a silent system, buried beneath sand and stone, but its pulse sustains tens of millions. At its core, this was a national statement. If nature won't give us rivers, we'll build our own. But this kind of defiance comes with a price. Desalination requires staggering amounts of energy, and maintaining long-distance water pipelines through shifting sands and extreme temperatures is no easy feat. Still, Saudi Arabia pressed forward, investing billions to push the limits of what water engineering could do. Every new pipeline, every pump station, became a symbol of resilience, a quiet rebellion against geography. And for many Saudis, it wasn't just about infrastructure, it was about identity. Water, once the rarest treasure, was becoming a right. Today, the kingdom's vast freshwater network moves millions of cubic meters daily, powering cities that once seemed impossible. Farmers in regions once abandoned to dust now irrigate small green plots using desalinated water. And though the project began as a desperate measure, it evolved into something far more profound, a declaration that the desert doesn't have to mean death. But as the system grew, so did the challenge. The vision was bold, but the execution would demand near superhuman precision, building through scorching deserts, across fault lines, and even tunneling through mountains nearly 2 miles high. And that's where the next part of the story begins, the engineering miracle that made it all possible. They had the vision. Now came the impossible part, turning that dream into steel, tunnels, and rivers that flowed where nature never meant them to. Building the man-made Nile. Turning a vision into reality in Saudi Arabia meant battling not only physics, but also the planet itself. The kingdom's terrain is a test of extremes: mountains scraping the clouds in the west, dunes swallowing horizons in the east, and a climate that seems designed to destroy anything built by human hands. Yet this is where engineers decided to carve a river not of water running freely above ground, but of steel and pressure hidden deep beneath it. At the heart of the plan was a deceptively simple idea: desalinate seawater at the coast and push it inland through a colossal network of pipes. But there's nothing simple about moving billions of liters of water across thousands of kilometers of desert. Every kilometer meant heat expansion, corrosion, shifting sands, and altitude changes that could crush pipes or burn out pumps. To make it work, Saudi Arabia needed not just technology, it needed invention. The country's west coast along the Red Sea became the launch pad. Facilities like Shuaiba, Yanbu, and Shukaik emerged as the new river mouths of this artificial waterway. Each of these plants pulls seawater from the Red Sea, forcing it through membranes that remove 99.9% of the salt and impurities. What comes out isn't just clean, it's some of the purest water on the planet, rivaling bottled standards. But desalination is only half the story. The real challenge begins when that water leaves the coast. Take, for instance, the Shukaik Abhakamis Mushayit transmission system, one of the most impressive feats of civil engineering in modern times. It carries water from the Red Sea up into the mountains of Asir province, climbing nearly 10,000 feet above sea level through a mix of tunnels, pressure valves, and relay stations. This pipeline alone stretches hundreds of kilometers and supplies over 200,000 cubic meters of water per day, enough to serve millions. The route slices through terrain so rugged that, in places, workers had to carve tunnels through granite cliffs while battling temperatures that soared beyond 45 degrees Celsius. One of the crown jewels of the entire network is the 12.5-kilometer water tunnel completed by the Saline Water Conversion Corporation, SWCC, in 2020. It cuts directly through the Sarawat Mountains, making it the longest water pipeline tunnel of its kind in the world. Engineers used advanced tunnel boring machines, the same technology used in high-speed rail projects, to dig through rock formations that had never been touched before. What's more astonishing is that the tunnel had to maintain perfect pressure and flow throughout, because even a minor miscalculation could cause a collapse or burst. Every meter of this subterranean river is monitored by smart sensors. These sensors track temperature, pressure, and flow rate, instantly flagging any irregularities. Some stations even use AI-based systems to predict where maintenance might be needed weeks in advance. In a way, the pipeline behaves like a living organism, adjusting itself, responding to stress, and protecting its own health. The material science behind it is equally impressive. Traditional steel would never survive under such relentless conditions, so Saudi engineers turned to high-alloy, corrosion-resistant steel, coated with protective polymers designed to withstand both seawater salinity and desert heat. The pipes are buried several meters underground to keep them cool and shielded from the elements, while pump stations are spaced strategically to maintain consistent flow across extreme elevation changes. Moving water uphill requires immense energy. Pumping stations, some the size of aircraft hangars, hum day and night, powered by electricity from both fossil fuels and, increasingly, renewable sources. The newer plants integrate solar and wind inputs, reflecting Saudi Arabia's growing push towards sustainability. The government's Vision 2030 framework aims to make future desalination facilities fully powered by clean energy, turning what was once an energy-hungry process into a symbol of green innovation. In total, the SWCC and its partners now manage over 14,000 kilometers of water pipelines, linking desalination plants to cities as far apart as Tabuk, Riyadh, Mecca, and Medina. It's not one single line, but a network so vast that if laid end to end, It would stretch longer than the Nile, twice, in fact. That's where the metaphor becomes reality. A human-made river flowing under the desert, invisible but vital, redefining what a river can be in the modern age. Building such an immense system required collaboration on a global scale. Companies and experts from Japan, South Korea, Germany, and the United States were brought in for specialized engineering, manufacturing, and automation. Thousands of Saudi workers joined the effort, turning this mega-project into a showcase of national pride. Every drop that reaches Riyadh or Taif, one engineer said, is a victory against nature itself. Of course, victories don't come cheap. Desalination remains one of the most expensive methods of producing fresh water. Each cubic meter costs multiple times more than groundwater extraction. But for Saudi Arabia, cost was never the primary concern. Sustainability was. Groundwater aquifers were finite. Once depleted, they'd take millennia to recover. The pipelines, on the other hand, could deliver renewable water endlessly, as long as the sea and power endured. The engineering triumphs didn't just change cities, they began reshaping landscapes. In regions like Taif and Baha, the arrival of reliable water has sparked the growth of new communities, parks, and even reforestation projects. Some local farmers have begun cultivating crops that hadn't grown there in centuries. Where once there were only dry wadis, ancient riverbeds, small streams of reclaimed water now run again. Still, the magnitude of this network has raised questions. Critics point out that desalination leaves behind vast quantities of brine, a concentrated salt byproduct that, if released carelessly, can harm marine ecosystems. Others worry about the carbon footprint of powering such an enormous infrastructure. Saudi engineers counter that these issues are being addressed, with newer plants recycling brine for industrial uses and renewable energy projects like NEOM's Green Hydrogen Initiative poised to offset emissions. For all its challenges, the project remains a rare kind of global story, one that straddles science fiction and survival. From space, satellites can't see the pipelines, but they can see what they've made possible. Green dots spreading across a map once dominated by beige. In a nation built on oil, water has become the new currency of progress. When the first drops of desalinated water reached Riyadh decades ago, there was celebration, but also disbelief. How could a city hundreds of kilometers from the sea now drink water that once belonged to the Red Sea? Today, it's routine, a miracle so common that people forget it's a miracle at all. And maybe that's the truest sign of success, when the impossible becomes ordinary. Saudi Arabia's man-made river doesn't sparkle in the sun, nor does it carve valleys. It runs quietly underground, unseen but unrelenting, carrying with it the story of a nation refusing to surrender to its geography. It's a triumph of engineering, yes, but also of imagination. Because, in the end, what they built wasn't just a pipeline. It was proof that even the harshest desert can be persuaded to listen. But this raises a curious question. Of all the ways to fight the desert, why choose pipelines and desalination as the answer, and not something simpler or more natural? The reason lies deep within the kingdom's relationship with water itself. Why water and not anything else? Every great civilization begins with water. It's not a poetic statement, it's a biological law. Mesopotamia had the Tigris and Euphrates. Egypt had the Nile. China had the Yangtze. For thousands of years, rivers decided who would thrive and who would vanish. Saudi Arabia, on the other hand, was born in defiance of that rule. It had oil instead of rivers, dunes instead of deltas, and wind instead of rain. But as the 21st century unfolded, the kingdom realized something uncomfortable. Oil could buy anything except water. When the first desalination plants began operating in the 70s, they weren't seen as revolutionary. They were seen as desperate. But it came at a staggering cost. Those aquifers, ancient pockets of water trapped for thousands of years beneath the desert, were not renewable. Every liter pumped was a liter gone forever. By the 2000s, entire fields dried up, and farmers abandoned once productive land. Something had to change. Water, not oil, became the true measure of progress. It was the one resource that could transform a desert society into a sustainable one. Food security, population growth, agriculture, and industry, all of it hinged on access to clean water. And so, while other nations were building new roads and ports, Saudi Arabia started building rivers. But why not focus on something else? Rain harvesting, groundwater extraction, or massive importation schemes? The answer lies in geography and scale. Saudi Arabia gets an average of just 100 millimeters of rainfall per year, most of which evaporates before it even touches the ground. There are no permanent rivers, and underground water sources are scattered, ancient, and difficult to replenish. The Red Sea and Arabian Gulf, though, offered a limitless resource if one had the technology and willpower to tame them. Desalination, for all its complexity, offered predictability. It didn't depend on the sky or the seasons. It was controllable, measurable, and expandable. Everything nature wasn't. By investing in desalination and pipeline infrastructure, Saudi Arabia could build certainty into an uncertain landscape. And here's where the story becomes uniquely Saudi. In most parts of the world, water systems are local. You drill, you store, you distribute within a region. But in Saudi Arabia, that model couldn't work because local water didn't exist. The kingdom needed a national approach, one unified, interconnected system that could move water from the coasts deep into the heart of the desert. It was water not as geography, but as infrastructure. This was more than engineering. It was nation-building. Cities that once relied on tanker trucks, literally hauling water across the dunes, suddenly had access to continuous supply. Riyadh, which sits hundreds of kilometers from the nearest sea, became a symbol of what the network made possible. A modern metropolis in the middle of nowhere. The same pipelines that quenched the capital also powered industries, cooled power plants, and supported new agricultural zones in the interior. But the choice to bet everything on water wasn't just practical, it was philosophical. In a region often associated with scarcity, the kingdom wanted to redefine what abundance could mean. Water became the quiet cornerstone of Vision 2030, not just as a utility, but as a moral commitment, the promise that even in the harshest conditions, life would be made possible. That promise extended beyond human needs. In recent years, Saudi Arabia has launched reforestation programs across the desert, using desalinated water to irrigate millions of trees. Projects like the Green Riyadh Initiative aim to plant over 7 million trees in the capital alone, reducing temperatures, filtering dust, and improving air quality. Across the country, small green belts and parks now dot the desert, forming corridors of life supported entirely by the same pipelines that feed the cities. The symbolism isn't lost on anyone. Once, water followed the will of nature. Now, in Saudi Arabia, it follows the will of people. The desert, once seen as lifeless, is slowly being rewritten as a canvas for regeneration. Of course, this vision isn't without critics. Environmentalists argue that desalination's energy consumption makes it unsustainable in the long term. Some call it a hydrological illusion, trading one scarcity for another by burning fuel to produce water. Saudi engineers acknowledge this concern, but point out that the next generation of plants will run on renewable energy, particularly solar. The country's year-round sunlight, once just a source of heat, could soon power the very systems that cool and sustain its cities. And perhaps that's the real genius of the Saudi approach, not that they chose water, but how they chose it. Where others saw the sea as a boundary, they saw it as a source. Where others saw the desert as dead, they saw it as a blank page. By reimagining water as infrastructure rather than miracle, the kingdom turned a geological curse into a logistical challenge, one they could actually solve. The gamble is immense. The maintenance is constant. But every drop of water that travels from a coastal desalination plant to a glass in Riyadh is a quiet reminder that innovation often begins where survival leaves no choice. It's easy to look at Saudi Arabia's megaprojects, the gleaming cities, the the futuristic developments like NILE-LONG, and forget that all of it depends on something invisible: the water humming quietly beneath the sand. Without it, every tower, every farm, every dream would collapse back into dust. So, while the world may measure Saudi Arabia in barrels of oil or gigawatts of solar energy, those within the kingdom know the truth. The real treasure isn't black gold anymore. It's the clear, flowing water that makes life possible in a place that nature tried to forget. And as this human-made river expanded, something unexpected began to happen. The world started to notice. Some nations praised the achievement, others raised alarms, and all of them wanted to know the same thing. Could this be the model for a planet running out of water? The answer came in waves of admiration, concern, and curiosity. Around the globe, scientists, engineers, and environmentalists began weighing in on Saudi Arabia's artificial river. Their reactions revealed just how divided the world was about humanity's attempt to outsmart the desert. Praise, doubt, and the desert's new reputation. When Saudi Arabia unveiled its vast freshwater pipeline system, it wasn't just a national headline, it was a global spectacle. For some, it was proof that technology could conquer even the harshest frontiers. For others, it was a warning, a glimpse into the price humanity might pay for defying natural limits. Either way, one thing was certain: the world was watching. In international engineering circles, the achievement drew admiration. Experts from Europe and Asia hailed the kingdom's pipeline system as one of the most ambitious hydraulic feats of the century. The sheer logistics, pumping billions of liters of water every day across deserts, over mountains, and into cities hundreds of kilometers inland, were staggering. Nations struggling with drought saw Saudi Arabia as a living laboratory. If they could do it in the Arabian Peninsula, perhaps similar systems could save regions like the Sahel, Western India, or the American Southwest. At the same time, environmental scientists and policy analysts voiced growing concern. Their question wasn't whether Saudi Arabia could move water, but whether it should do it this way. Desalination, while powerful, comes with consequences. The process leaves behind brine, ultra-salty residue that, when discharged into the ocean, can harm marine ecosystems. Critics warned that if desalination scaled up unchecked, it could alter coastal habitats and damage biodiversity along the Red Sea and Arabian Gulf. Saudi officials countered that modern plants now recycle much of their brine, diluting it before release or using it in salt recovery projects. Still, the debate didn't stop. The conversation expanded from engineering to ethics. Was it right for one country to use so much energy to make water while others were being told to conserve it? Yet, beyond the policy arguments, the human reaction told a different story. Visitors who had once imagined Saudi Arabia as nothing but sand were stunned to find green boulevards, fountains, and palm-lined highways in places that hadn't seen rain in decades. Cities like Riyadh and Taif now boasted urban parks and reservoirs. Farmers in remote areas, once forced to rely on tanker deliveries, began planting again, cautiously, sustainably, with crops suited to the arid climate. The transformation wasn't just physical, it was psychological. The desert, once synonymous with scarcity, had become a symbol of possibility. Water, once feared as a vanishing resource, now represented resilience and renewal. In documentaries and global news coverage, journalists began referring to the pipeline as the man-made river, drawing parallels to Egypt's Nile or China's South-North Water Transfer Project. And indeed, comparisons were inevitable. Like those ancient and modern rivers, Saudi's system wasn't just a utility, it was a statement. It said, "We will not be defined by what nature denied us." But for every admirer, there was a skeptic. Climate activists argued that such projects, while impressive, distract from the root problem: overconsumption. You can't engineer your way out of every crisis, one UN water advisor warned. Eventually, you have to change how you live, not just how you pipe. Saudi Arabia's response, however, reflected a deeper cultural mindset, one that prizes adaptation over surrender. The kingdom's planners insisted that technology wasn't a denial of nature, but a dialogue with it. If humans could adapt to space travel and deep-sea exploration, why not to the desert? International partners began to take notes. Japan collaborated on advanced reverse osmosis membranes. South Korea and Germany studied the kingdom's pumping station designs for their own use. The Saline Water Conversion Corporation, SWCC, once a domestic agency, suddenly found itself advising global partners on desalination efficiency. The project's success gave Saudi Arabia something rare: soft power born from sustainability. In neighboring countries, the reaction was mixed. The United Arab Emirates, which had long pioneered its own desalination projects, viewed Saudi Arabia's man-made Nile with admiration and a touch of rivalry. Egypt, proud of its actual Nile, praised the innovation but cautioned against ignoring ecological balance. Meanwhile, in drought-stricken nations like Jordan and Tunisia, leaders began to discuss similar mega-infrastructure as potential solutions. Social media, of course, turned the whole story into legend. Videos of crystal-clear water rushing through the desert went viral. Young Saudis filmed themselves beside massive pumping stations, joking that they lived by the sea, but in the sand. What once symbolized hardship had become a source of pride, a reminder that their homeland could outthink even the climate itself. But perhaps the most profound reactions came from scientists studying climate resilience. The Saudi experiment raised questions far beyond engineering. Could controlled water transfer projects become the blueprint for survival in a warming world? As glaciers melt, rivers dry, and billions face potential water scarcity, the idea of liquid infrastructure, moving water like we move electricity, began to sound less like science fiction and more like necessity. In 2024, the World Water Forum held in Bali featured a session dedicated entirely to Saudi Arabia's model. Delegates debated its implications, costs, and adaptability. One researcher called it the future of civilization's plumbing. Another warned it could accelerate dependence on energy-intensive lifelines. Both were right. The system's brilliance and its risk were inseparable. Because the truth is, Saudi Arabia's story is both inspiration and cautionary tale. It shows what's possible when a nation refuses to accept environmental destiny, but also what happens when the balance between human will and natural limits grows thin. And yet, despite the criticism, there's a certain poetry in it all. The very desert that once symbolized the end of life now flows with it. The same land that devoured caravans and silenced travelers now hums with the quiet rush of water through pipes, a heartbeat under the sand. In the end, the world's reaction to Saudi Arabia's man-made Nile reveals less about pipelines and more about philosophy. Some see arrogance, others see hope. But both agree, the desert has changed forever. And as the debate rippled across continents, a curious pattern began to emerge. Saudi Arabia wasn't alone. Other nations, too, had been waging their own battles with dryness and distance, building their own versions of water miracles. From North Africa to South America, a quiet global movement was taking shape. Beyond Arabia's borders, the idea of engineering water had already taken root. In deserts, savannas, and mountains around the world, some projects thrived, others failed spectacularly, but all shared the same dream: to bring life where nature had withdrawn it. Beyond Arabia, other nations that tried to rewrite the water equation. Saudi Arabia's monumental pipeline might have captured headlines, but it wasn't the only country daring to challenge geography. Across the world, other nations were quietly attempting the same miracle, bringing water to places nature had long abandoned. In Egypt, engineers have been working on the New Delta project, a colossal plan to extend the Nile's blessings into the western desert. Massive canals, pumps, and reservoirs are being built to irrigate over 1 million acres of arid land, using both Nile water and treated wastewater. The goal mirrors Saudi Arabia's ambition: food security, population expansion, and resilience against climate shocks. But the challenge, as always, is balance. Egypt must divert just enough water for the desert without starving the Nile-fed heartland that has sustained civilization for millennia. Farther west, in North Africa, similar dreams flow through the sands. Libya's great man-made river project, launched under Muammar Gaddafi in the 80s, remains one of history's largest water transport systems. It channels ancient fossil water from deep beneath the Sahara to coastal cities like Tripoli and Benghazi. For decades, it turned barren landscapes into farmland, but at a cost. Those aquifers, like Saudi Arabia's, are non-renewable. Once drained, they will never refill. The project stands today as both triumph and warning, proof that human ingenuity can summon rivers where none exist, but only for so long. Meanwhile, in Australia, the story runs in reverse. The nation learned that introducing life into drylands can backfire catastrophically. European settlers released rabbits in the 1800s to make the landscape feel more familiar, and the population exploded. What began as a handful of animals became a plague of millions, stripping vegetation and accelerating desertification. Where Saudi Arabia used control and precision to green the desert, Australia's lesson was chaos born of carelessness. In the United Arab Emirates, engineers have taken a hybrid approach. Artificial oases and coastal desalination plants feed vast networks of drip irrigation farms. The UAE has even tested cloud seeding, using aircraft to trigger rain in the desert. These experiments show that, in a warming world, innovation may no longer be optional. Like Saudi Arabia, the Emirates are proving that survival can be engineered, one droplet at a time. Even in South America, nations such as Chile and Peru are experimenting with moving water across impossible terrain. In the Atacama Desert, the driest place on Earth, small-scale pipelines and fog-capturing nets provide communities with fresh water collected from the sky itself. While not on the scale of Saudi Arabia's projects, they embody the same principle, that human will, guided by science, can bend the limits of nature. Across continents, the same paradox unfolds. These projects bring life, but they also carry the shadow of dependency. Once you turn the desert green, you must keep it alive forever. That means more energy, more technology, more vigilance. One broken link, one dry year, and the illusion of abundance can crumble. Still, there's something universal in the attempt. Whether in Arabia, Africa, or the Andes, the human story remains the same: the refusal to accept the word impossible. Subscribe for more stories where humanity dares to rewrite the laws of nature. Thanks for watching.